These videos could be seen as a series of what happens when someone was abused as a child. And this is because the first one was a general look at what can happen if someone was abused as a child. The second one took a look at what can happen if someone was neglected as a child. And this one looks at what can happen if someone was physically abused as a child. And like with the video I just did on neglect, I will look at different consequences of physical abuse. But although I will look at the different things, a number of these symptoms or consequences merge with others. So although they are separate, they all work together, and it can seem as though I'm talking about the same thing, but it will be a slightly different symptom. So let's start off and let's go to the first thing that can happen if someone was physically abused. And of course, if someone was physically abused as a child, and this could mean that they were hit with a fist or a hand or a leg, they may have been burnt, they may have been hit with something else. There's all kinds of things that can happen, or all kinds of ways that this can happen. But what is most likely to take place if this does happen is that someone will have been extremely traumatized as a child. And the reason why this is likely to have been a lot worse than if they were hit later on, like say as an adolescent or in their adult life, was because their brain would have still been developing. So they would have had less going on up top to be able to handle the effect or the effects of being physically harmed. So through being physically abused, and this may have been something that took place every day, may have been every now and then, it may have been something that was carried out by one parent or both parents and other family members. Even a sibling may have been involved. But this would have most likely loaded their body with trauma. And this would have most likely impacted the brain in their head, the brain in their stomach, so the enteric system down below. And this can then affect their ability to remember things, to learn, to have self-awareness, to regulate their emotions. And so what should have been a time when they received what they needed to develop in the right way would have been a time when they were completely undermined, massively undermined. And the next thing someone can find is that as an adult they have issues with anger and rage. So they can get angry at the wrong times, they can become really angry for pretty much no reason. And if this isn't the case, they can find they have the tendency to repress their anger and their rage. And part of them may believe that if they were to get angry, they could end up causing a lot of harm, perhaps even repeating what took place to them. And of course, it can take a lot of energy to keep all this anger, all this pressure within them. And this can mean that they have trouble with their gums and headaches and stomach problems because all this anger that's in there. Another thing through the trauma is that they can find they have lots of anxiety and fear, perhaps even terror. That they spend a lot of time in the fight or flight mode or even freeze mode. So then it's going to be a challenge for them to feel at peace and to settle down, because due to what happened it can seem as though the world is going to end and that they're about to be harmed at any moment. Another thing is that they can find that they spend a lot of time feeling depressed, feel down. And this can partly be the result of holding all the anger in. As they say, repressed anger can lead to depression. It can be that. It can be because they just feel so bad about themselves. And it can be because they're carrying a lot of inflammation as well, due to the trauma of being attacked as a child. And another thing, they can feel worthless. Or they're most likely to feel worthless. So through being harmed as a child, they can carry a lot of toxic shame. So it's then not going to be a case of they just feel worthless and they just have some negative thoughts. Their whole being can be completely consumed by toxic shame. So it's then going to seem as though they are worthless. This is who they are and they can't do anything about it. So through carrying this, they can have no self-esteem. They can believe that they don't deserve anything. They won't have a healthy sense of entitlement. And of course, entitlement mentality is not something that they'll have. And this is obviously something that's been given a bad name, because when someone has too much of this, they can believe that the world just owes them everything because they were born. And they don't need to do anything. But when someone doesn't have a small sense of entitlement, it can stop them from taking the first step. So someone like this can then believe that they need to, when they have a healthy sense of entitlement, they can believe that they need to take the first step. And not that the world is just going to give them everything they need, but through having that entitlement, there's healthy sense. It can allow them to take the first step, to go for that job interview, to talk to someone. But without that in place, they won't even take the first step. So this is then going to make it hard for them to achieve their goals, to be successful. And another thing, something that I've partly touched upon, is that they can spend a lot of time living on edge and being highly strung. And another thing, they can have a strong need to please others, which makes sense because deep down, whether they are aware of this or not, they can believe that if they don't please others and do what they want, then they will be harmed again. And just like when they were younger, it probably would have felt as though their life was going to end whenever they were being attacked. Because obviously they're a very small child and there's these huge adults who are harming them. So it's not going to be a surprise for them to be very submissive and easygoing and to just blend in. Because asserting themselves is going to be too much of a risk. And another thing, they can be very shy, very quiet, and withdrawn. Because, again, if they speak out and express themselves, they can believe that they will be harmed and attacked. So keeping things to themselves, going along to get along, can be the norm. And as part of this, they're going to have boundary problems. So trouble, as I said, trouble asserting themselves, and also trouble saying no and standing their ground. So they can allow people to walk over them, and this can cause them to suffer, make them even more angry. But standing their ground is going to be seen as being something that's too much of a risk. It won't just be a case of saying no, and that's okay. If they even try to say no, they could experience extreme fear and even terror. And this is because they can basically have post-traumatic stress. So they can live somewhere that is very safe, very secure, but it can be as if they're in a war zone. And that's because at one point in their life, it would have seemed this way. It was not they were trying to stop themselves from being shot, although they might have been. It was that they're trying to stop themselves from being harmed. And then what this can also mean is that they have heightened perceptions, so they're very good at reading people's facial expressions and emotions, because this was something that they had to develop to try to limit the harm that they experienced. And just coming back to what I said about the toxic shame, the reason why they can feel so worthless is because they can believe deep down that they were harmed, because there was something wrong with them, because they did bad things. And it's because they would have been egocentric, when in reality the reason they were harmed is not because there was something wrong with them, or because they were bad or wrong or sinful or whatever it was in their household. It was because there was something going on for their caregivers. There was something wrong with them. Perhaps these people were also physically harmed as well. So the physical abuse was passed down, and it could go back many generations. And another consequence of this is that they may find that they end up with people who are abusive. So these people can be verbally abusive, they can even hit them. And the reason for this is that through being exposed to this kind of behaviour, a big part of them can feel comfortable with it. And this is because what is familiar is what is classed as what is safe. So even though this wasn't good for them and they suffered, part of them can feel very comfortable with it. And through experiencing physical abuse, they may have learned to attach to people based on trauma, not love. So this is often called trauma bonding. So someone like this can have a strong need, or they can be addicted to adrenaline. So unless they are with someone who is all over the place and dangerous, they might not be attracted to them. So this shows how their early experiences would have set them up to be attracted to dysfunctional people. And it's because their upbringing was dysfunctional. Another thing, they can have a lot of trouble trusting people, or they can go the other extreme and end up just trusting anyone. And if they do have trouble trusting people, this is not going to be a surprise, because the people who were supposed to be there and look after them let them down. They couldn't trust these people, so if they couldn't trust them, why should they trust anyone else? And another thing, and this goes into something that I've already spoken about, is that they can find it hard to feel safe and secure. And this is because through carrying so much trauma in their brain and in their head and their body being in such a bad way, they can have so much anarchy going on within them, so they can't feel safe in their own body. And then what is going on internally ends up being projected externally. So is there not just because of how they feel that they can't settle down, it's because of what's going on externally. And there could be lots of things going on, but there might not be. As I said, they could live in a very safe and secure area, but because they are so unstable, because they're in this fight or flight mode, they won't be able to settle down. So they can then be used to all this stress, lots of cortisol running through their body, and it's going to be bad for their health. Another thing, they can spend a lot of time being disconnected from their own body. They can be dissociated a lot, and so they can find it hard to connect to their needs and their feelings. And another thing, through carrying so much shame, they can basically hide who they are. And it's because they'll believe there's something wrong with who they are. So the only way for them to stop themselves from being rejected and abandoned will be to play a role, to hide behind a mask. Because if they don't do this, they can believe that no one will be there for them. And another thing, self-harming. They can have a strong inner critic, so they can beat themselves up. They can neglect themselves, putting other people's needs first all the time. They can even cut themselves and drive dangerously and engage in extreme sports. And this can be a sign of what happens when the so-called death instinct or the Thanatos instinct, I guess Thanatos or Sanatos, one of them, gets brought into play, because they can have a need to kill themselves through feeling so bad about who they are. They can just want their life to end. So the suicidal feelings and thoughts. And another thing that can happen is that someone can go to the other extreme. So instead of being someone who is very passive and fearful and does what they can to please others, they can become super aggressive, can become violent, a bully, a mini dictator, a tyrant, or even a terrorist. And they will then inflict upon others that which was done to them. And this can be seen as a form of indirect revenge. It won't allow them to deal with what is taking place within them. But through projection and a lack of self-awareness, they can believe that these people are at fault for their life, for how they feel, even though these people will be innocent and they will have played no part. So this then shows how child abuse causes so much damage, not locally but on a global scale. So if you were physically abused as a child, I will say that you don't need to experience life in this way until the end of your life. It can change. Because the fact is that you didn't deserve to experience what you went through. And so if you did go through a tough time, a very tough time, and your life is still tough, please reach out for external support. This could be a therapist, a healer, or a support group. But do something, because what happened wasn't your fault, and you deserve to live a life that is worth living. But you have to reach out and not allow yourself to suffer in silence.